Okay. So, Aaron, tell me a little bit about yourself. Tell me your background, what you're doing right now, and what you would like to be doing.
Okay, so I guess like a little bit about me, like more related to like graphic design, since that's what we're kind of like touching on today. I actually like don't come from a graphic design background at all. Right now I'm currently like in a place where I'm kind of like transitioning careers. Like when I went to school, I actually graduated with a child development degree, and then I thought I wanted to like work with kids and like work in schools. And then eventually, like, I decided, like, oh, maybe I want to try out like healthcare, like nursing. And then got into nursing school, kind of decided like that wasn't for me either. And then during the pandemic, I kind of had like I had like a lot of time because like we were all at home. And I decided just like out of the blue to just like pick up like Photoshop and just like test it out because it's something that like I'd always been interested in like just like the visual like aspect of things. So yeah, I kind of just picked it up as a hobby, and then like in the last like year or so, I've been like kind of helping out with like running this like music event in LA because I'm side note like I'm also a DJ. So I also like run like my own like parties. I help like my other friend like run his party too. So I'd be helping him like work on like social media assets for that. So after last year, I was like, okay, I feel like I'm really interested in doing like graphic design, um, and kind of just like seeing where that goes. So like currently, like I feel like I've just been working on a lot more so like personal projects, like doing like flyers for like songs or like just like events and things like that. Just more like stuff for like me like as a DJ too. Like right now I am like doing like an internship with like a smaller like art collective. They have like this like subdivision for like a video podcast. So I've been kind of helping out with that. But as far as like actual like working experience in like the real world, I haven't really gotten like there yet. I feel like I'm still kind of like building my portfolio in a way. So that's kind of where I'm at. But I'm hoping like at least for this year, like I think I would like to like get my feet wet and like actually like start to work for like a company or something like that. And then eventually like I think my ultimate goal is to like make my way to doing like freelance just because yeah, I feel like I just like working on like my own schedule for the most part. So that eventually I think would be my goal.
Very cool. This week is filled with the multifaceted individuals that do this or do that, or I think I spoke with someone yesterday who also does events.
Oh yeah.
More like I don't know if she was a DJ, but I'm sure she'll maybe tap into it eventually. But she hosts her own events as well, and I think she didn't initially study like graphic design or anything like that. Um, so it's really cool. I'm trying to also like organize my thoughts this
Oh
morning.
yeah, no worries.
Um, so you have a very rich background, nursing school, child development. And I think it's really interesting when, you kind of end up landing on graphic design, even after some of these other like experiences. I think they're really great to kind of make sure you acknowledge and don't try to forget, because
Mhm.
sometimes it could actually be really helpful to use those experiences to kind of like inform your work, or how you go about graphic design, things like that.
Right.
One of like my biggest kind of like inspirations and somewhat mentor was my professor who like went and studied literature for years, and a lot of that like informed a lot of his projects and how he approaches design and things like that. So that's really cool. So you're currently doing an internship, and then you would like to potentially figure out like, okay, I would want to get a little bit more experience like working for some like kind of traditional designer role, correct?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I'm not really sure, like, as far as I guess, like, I don't, because I've never gone to like art school or anything like that. And I haven't gone like the traditional route of like I get my degree in like a design background. And then like from there, like, I don't really know like where people go after that to like build up like their resume and their experience. In your experience, do you think that would be like a good idea to like start working for like a company initially before like dabbing into freelance or?
Yeah. I don't like to recommend to people, hey, like you should just start finding freelance clients. That might be because like I'm very risk averse, I guess. I'm not very risk averse, believe me. But like I experienced what it was like to go freelance attempt to go freelance when I was young.
Mhm.
And it was very messy. I realized like I was getting into conversations that I just didn't know how to like approach, and I
Right.
realized that I was speaking with people and they were asking me for things. It was really a couple of people, but I was speaking to these clients and they
Mhm.
were asking for things, and I really had to like I really struggled to figure out like what it was they needed, or at the end of the day, like what it was ultimately that I needed to do for them or what they wanted.
Mhm.
And it got a little messy. And I don't say this to kind of scare you or anything like that, but it's kind of like, graphic design is a business, like people come to
Yeah.
you for a service and they want you to complete said service. Um, and I think for me, it was really important to learn about business a bit, to be able to understand like how I want to run a business and how I want to work with clients and what that relationship looks like. And that was really important for me. Um, that's not to say like you couldn't go ahead and do it. I mean, the best way to learn is sometimes to just either fail or go through the trials and tribulations
Mhm.
and, figure it out as you go. For me, it was really it was a lot easier to like go and learn from more experienced people, like whether that be going for a full-time job or like sitting down and having coffee with as many creatives in the space that I wanted to, or I started a podcast that was very much like selfishly geared towards learning from other designers who are like starting their own thing,
Mhm.
so that I could like understand what they went through, so that I could kind of just like learn a lot faster. So, there's a million ways to go about it. And you don't necessarily have to get a job to do that. You could, you in your free time, whether you're working at a coffee shop or DJing or going to nursing school, whatever, you can like just go and try to build relationships with these people and learn from them just by talking to them. I, took the long and uh somewhat frustrating road of working a full-time job for 9 years and
Mhm.
different jobs. But, until I got to the point where I was sick of it, I tend to do that in my life where I just put myself through pain for as long as possible. And then when I'm finally absolutely sick of it, I change directions. Um, so it's really like I don't want to, I don't want to make this a big like life decision and like, oh, you gotta like look inside of you and figure it out on your own. But like, it does help to kind of like think about like, okay, what is it that you want to learn? Is it that you want to learn how to become a very like is there a skill that you're trying to learn, with graphic design? Like, do you just want to be better at making graphic design? Or is it like, do you want to figure out relationships with clients, or like, like there are these parts, because some of these things that you can learn on your own completely, you could just go
Right.
on YouTube all the time and work and work and work and work through tutorials or whatever, and you'll get pretty damn far. But some of those things I find to be a lot easier by like going and having an internship for a couple of months. I mean,
Mm.
honestly, like you can find another internship if you wanted to.
Yeah.
And that would be like a really great way to get experience as well, because it's very short, it's usually like a short-term engagement. And you can have two or three of those, and by the end of it, you'd be like, great. I've learned some really awesome stuff from some really great people. And now I feel ready to go and do that thing for, go and do it on my own.
Mhm.
I mean, I don't think like the fact that, you don't have a traditional background in design is necessarily a matter anymore. Like, again, I know I've spoken with a lot of designers through these reviews that are self-taught, and some are super, super talented, like amazed. And, I would like, wouldn't doubt to give them my money to do work for me, you
Right.
know?
Yeah.
Um, and like, it hasn't stopped them from doing it. And, there's nothing stopping you from also, taking it as far as you want.
Yeah. That's actually like really like reassuring to hear, just because like I feel like a lot of the time like I kind of get like this imposter syndrome of like, oh my gosh, like I have like no like formal background in this at all. All I can rely on really is just like my creativity and like my skill set at this point. But I think like listening to you like talk about like you how you went through like your own process with it, like yeah, it's just like reassuring to know that like what I've been doing so far to just like try and get experience in like the little ways that I can like still take me to like where I want to be like in the future.
I think like one of the best things um that I still do to this day, I think, is like always being curious about design. Like, that's, I think, the biggest thing that drives you to be better. You
Mhm.
know, I constantly look at different design studios. I'm constantly looking at work from other, people or places that I admire, whether that be like full on graphic design, or that be other art, or that be other, things that people are making. And it inspires me. I look at it and I say, okay, cool. Like, how, like, what is that for me? Like, whatever they made, like, whether it's like the idea of like coming up with your own project, or like this really awesome identity, or like this really awesome website. And sometimes it'll excite me to the point where I want to go and start my own thing, right? Like, quote
Right.
unquote, my own passion project. And I do that like constantly, like even amongst like client work and the things that you have to do to like pay your bills and stuff like that. Like, I will be working on something now. Some may say it's not healthy, like mentally and in terms of balance, but like it brings me joy to like push myself to make these things, because I'm like practicing and getting better.
Mhm.
Um, but also sometimes those things turn into like real tangible outcomes, like whether it's like, again, I did a podcast that was literally just me practicing at the time to get better working with like video and sound and or audio and photography, because that's the kind of job that I was working in at the time, and I didn't have that experience before. um, these portfolio reviews are very much like a similar thing, where this is like an experiment to see where it goes and what I can do with it. And in that like process, and that journey, is also like me getting better at, excuse me, at design. And like, I think of that for you as, you are this person who's also like DJing and throwing their own events, and like that is the perfect like playground for you to experiment, and push the things that you want to do. I'm sure you're familiar with like Boiler Room and Circle, and
Yeah.
you've seen like, I mean, I used to work in a nightclub, so like I'm in that space, and you are very familiar with like the design that goes around in like the music industry
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So like being a creative, or being someone that likes to make things, whether a designer or like you're putting on events or something, like it's contagious, it's like addictive a bit,
Mhm.
because you can like come up with things and actually make them come to life, whereas some people kind of push that out of their head, like, oh, I can't do this, I can't be creative, and I'm gonna go into sales or finance or whatever it is.
Right.
And like, at times it feels like a superpower.
Mhm.
um I want to pull up your portfolio website really quickly. I started clicking
Sure.
around. Um, and similar to the discussion I had yesterday with um the individual who was also putting on events, I think there's a couple of things. Well, first of all, like, do you have any other questions before we jump into your portfolio? And then do you have any specifically questions about your portfolio that I should, that we should talk about?
I think if I come up with them as we're going through it, I'll let you know.
Mhm. So I think the one thing that I think of in your situation of like, okay, I'm someone who puts on events, very inspired by music. I don't have a traditional background. Um, the thing that I look for in a portfolio, while all of this is great, what are you using for this? Is this like Adobe Portfolio?
Yeah.
Okay. Um, the one thing that miss and that I find a lot of like designers miss in their portfolios, like all this is great, sure,
Mhm.
and I think you have a few different directions you can go with a portfolio. At the end of the day, like one, I want to understand the type of work that you like to make, right?
Mhm.
And then two, I want to be able to like get some context about who you are, what your process is like, and why you do the things that you do.
Mhm.
And so, you know, a lot of people just end up making their portfolio like the sort of like place where you just dump a lot of imagery, right? Like you've made this, I get that. But like at the end of the day, it just becomes like almost like a slideshow of like cool images, 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 images. All right.
Right.
And the reason why I say you have multiple, you like there's a bunch of different paths you can take.
Mhm.
Um, I think it's really important to kind of think about what it is like think about what makes sense for yourself. Um, because again, you have this idea of like, well, I'm someone who likes to put on events. I do music, I do DJing, and because design is a way for me to like make those things happen.
Mhm.
Um, but then also, there's this idea of like, well, I do kind of want to like gravitate into a place where I'm working as a graphic designer or I'm getting work as a graphic designer. I'm doing things that will help me like, in some way financially, like, let's be real, like, we all have to pay our bills and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so, usually what I recommend, especially if like the goal is to go and find an internship or experience at an agency or studio or whatever it may be, because there's a million different ways that you can go and work as a graphic designer. Um, I always kind of like, you know, talk about making sure you include that context, specifically with projects. And okay, this is good. Yeah, that's fine. Um, but for projects like this, where it's all you have is custom design for my alias Sanguine, right? That's how you say it, correct?
It's sanguine. Yeah.
Sanguine.
Yeah.
I illiterate.
No worries.
Um, you should think about like how do you illustrate your process? Like how do you talk about that? And I know it can be really hard to like and a little like intimidating when you're like, oh, I got to sit down and write this stuff out.
Mhm.
But what I find to be really easy for me, like I pace around my room or my office and I'll just talk out loud of like, what was I thinking when I was coming up with this product? Like, why did it get here? Like, why does it look
Yeah.
like this? Where does the name come from? Like give a background and try to create a story of like why you wanted to do this, why it ended up in this sort of place of, there's like options for you where
Mhm.
it's like you're using a typeface or using this or it's handwritten and try to get that down on the page as well.
Yeah.
Um, because, again, when you're going with this mindset of like, I want to go and work and get experience as a studio, a lot of people are going to be submitting their work and it's all going to look, you know, somewhat the same at the end of the day.
Mhm.
There's going to be a lot of images people are going to look at. But the thing that I think kind of like expresses a bit more experience and sort of stands out is when you can talk about your design and when you can actually walk people through it and help them understand how all those things in your head contributed to this final outcome.
Mhm.
So that's like really important. I see a lot of designers sort of miss out on. Um, the other direction that I don't necessarily recommend because it is kind of like very very, I don't want to say obvious, but like it's acknowledging that it's acknowledging the fact that you don't want to do anything that I just mentioned, right? So for example, like all of these are somewhat the form. One thing really quickly is like your format for some of these is really tough.
Mhm.
So what I mean is like you have these really long images and it's okay, but you just never end up getting the full thing in view, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah.
So I don't know if there's a way to shift how whether like it's a
Like,
grid or something, or these,
yeah,
how you
just
like format these images, but that's just like a technical thing to think about, right? Like,
mhm.
and I'm not saying everything needs to be in view at once, but like these are really big images. Like this is a poster.
Yeah.
Um, and if like the poster was the outcome, think about like putting this poster in a mock-up with like kind of like a mock-up that is, like the three posters that you'll see, on like a
Mhm.
billboard or something like that,
Mhm.
and because then that way at least that image would be like something like 1920 by 1080 and you could see it all in view.
Right.
um Also, another note really quickly, like the moment that you have these things that you make, okay, so these other things are loading, okay, I think it's just my connection and it's a little hard, but yeah, like these are, I almost feel like you could go this other way. So this other direction that I'm thinking about for portfolios for someone like yourself is, you have a lot of the same format in terms of like the sizing of these images, right? They're all kind of like
Mhm.
poster format and stuff.
Yeah.
And what I've seen done mostly from like more experienced creatives, because again, like at some point the work doesn't matter. It's like the relationships you build.
Mhm.
But these aren't like traditional like case studies that you have going, right?
Mhm.
These are kind of like things I've made along the way because I needed to like I had an objective, right? And that
Yeah.
could be the start of a case study and what I would actually push you to think about. And this other idea of what a portfolio could be is like literally this archive or this collection of all the work that you've done. Now, the way that this works is by the fact that you produce a lot, right? Like
Mhm.
you just have so much stuff that, you know, the sheer number of it kind of stands out
Mhm.
over the lack, or like the, I don't want to say lack, but like like the fact that you just don't have these like traditional case studies, right?
Yeah.
And so like something like that could look like where, all of these things, if they're all sort of like in these poster formats, just exist as like this never ending flow of imagery on your homepage. But again, like it's a very intentional move and it's a very specific, um, it's there's a very specific reason why that works. And it's because of the sheer quantity. Now, if you don't have quantity, it's not going to be as successful.
Mhm.
So it's something to think about. Maybe it's not a now thing, maybe it's a later thing. And maybe now it's more about, especially with this idea of like working with, wanting to get a studio,
Mhm.
is trying to create case studies around a couple of these projects.
Mhm.
Um, because like obviously Fred again, right? We all know him. He's super
Yeah.
popular, just played Coachella, all that stuff.
Yeah.
You could talk about why you're interested in Fred again. You could talk about his
Mhm.
background. You could build this story and then talk about each direction for these like album artworks that you've put together and why, and why they all look different or why they look the same or what's the uniform, whatever it may be. Um, and I would like recommend doing that for like one or two or if you can get three, do three. But
Yeah.
like that would help to be your kind of like the projects that you would talk about when, if you were to interview or if you were to, submit your work and to these more traditional like design roles, and people wanted to like kind of get more from just the work.
Yeah. I guess like in that case, I guess kind of using that example with like the like posters I've done for like the Fred again designs. Like are you saying like kind of like to give them kind of like a behind the scenes of like what went into like making this design, like what was like my rationale for like certain choices, like is that what you mean by like get like building a case study around that?
Yeah, so usually you can think of it as like, let's just abstract this a bit, right?
Mhm.
Um, like you'll let's just say you're working with a client and they come to you and they say, "Hey, I have this problem." Right? So that is usually like part of a case study is what was the problem?
Mhm.
Um, then you have sort of a piece that goes in like a part that's in between the solution, right? So it's like problem, concept, or thought, right? Like, oh, so the problem was that they need a website, but everyone has a website, and we didn't want to build a traditional website because they're unique in this way, this way, and this way.
Mhm.
And then when you start to say so, like that's the solution. So we built this specifically for these reasons, and this is how it was a good solution for that problem in this concept.
Mhm.
And that kind of like starts you off, right? And that's like the core, or not necessarily the core, but that's like the big meaty part usually. Having that as a minimum for a case study is always really helpful. Um, and then like what I like to do, because like I'm very keen on portfolio presentation. I learned through just like relentlessly interviewing when I was younger that it's better to have, you know, image and text kind of like a pairing almost as you're
Mhm.
going through. I'll like pull up my website really quickly.
Okay.
Just an example. And the reason why have arrived to this conclusion is like I'm saying, like I was at a job for 2.5, 3 years where at the time recruiters were just going crazy because tech was booming a bit.
Mhm.
And I would just interview, and I didn't want to change my job, but if they're going to offer me money, I was more money than I was making. I was like, why not take it? And almost like every other interview, like I'd realize that they were like referencing my website, or they looked at my website, and like either they liked something or like something didn't connect with them, and I'd make a change, and I'd update
Mhm.
that. I kept doing that. I interviewed at least like once or twice a week for a while.
Mhm.
And so what I mean by this idea of like, here is like my little statement of like, da 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 da, what started, like, this is sort of like that problem solution is a passion project. So like, it wasn't a real brief, but like I made it as real as
Mhm.
possible. And then as you're going through the page, you have like these moments of like, here's text that pairs with an image to help give you context.
Mhm.
Here's text that pairs with an image to help give you that context, and so on and so on and so on. And that's kind of like what I mean, like, yes, you can
Yeah.
have the website that like has all of this up at the top and just images afterwards. And a lot of places do that. That's absolutely fine. I found that for me, this started to work because again, like, you know, when I was making my portfolio and I was putting these images together, I was very like working really intentionally of like, cool, I want to have a section about just the logo, because
Mhm.
like that to me was me focusing on the fact that I want to do more branding work, and
Yeah.
setting up that sort of frame for clients to understand that that's like what I do or how I do it. And
Mhm.
then I wanted to set up a section about website and digital, and podcasts and stuff.
Mhm.
And so I did that. And same thing with like, so each of these kind of have sections as if I was to like talk to you about it or present a presentation about it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I see what you're saying about pairing like the text and the image. Like seeing that on your website like makes it a lot more sense for me.
Yeah, I think like, a lot of the time, again, it's just we there's some people who can like put emphasis behind the portfolio, and that's great. Or like it hits them when they have to. And then there are some that, kind of again, just like the portfolio, it's like I'm making all this stuff and I need a place to put it because I know I need a portfolio, and they just dump it. And that's like that's okay. But again, like I realized that the portfolio was going to usually be the first thing that I would um like that would be the first foot in the door,
Mhm.
like that would be the thing that would grab someone's attention for me. And
Right.
so that very much became like, okay, cool, how do I make that as much as possible, because I know, or as good as possible, because I know after that foot's in the door, it's easier for me to have a conversation with people and allow them to understand like my process and how I can work with them and things like that. Like that was always really easy for me.
Mhm.
But I needed to get my foot in the door first. So like what was going to be that wedge, and making my
Yeah.
portfolio stand out as much as possible was, in my mind, that solution.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Is there anything like outside of portfolio stuff? Because or portfolio stuff. I mean, like we can continue, but do you have any specific questions or anything that you wanted to like focus on or just kind of talk about more?
Yeah, I guess kind of like related to the portfolio, like how much like in graphic design, like how much does like a resume matter like versus like a portfolio?
Um, it depends. Like, where does that question come from for you? Like, what's the
I,
concern there?
I guess like because I guess like kind of like I mentioned, like I don't really have like that like formal background in design. And then as far as like work experience, like I haven't really had like working experience in design either. So I'm not sure if people that are would hire me like would see like my resume and be like, oh, like I see that they do have a portfolio with like work in it, but then they haven't necessarily like worked in graphic design before. So I don't know if that would be kind of like I don't know if that would kind of like deter them from like considering me.
I mean, we all have to start somewhere.
Mhm.
There's always someone needing a younger designer, a younger in their career to help them because they may not have the money for an experienced designer. So, and they may not be creative at all. So they want to be able to tell someone what they have in their head and have someone help them do that. I worked now, I know this isn't like directly like a great example, I guess, in your sense,
Mhm.
but like my first internship, and I also like don't like there are paid internships, so don't like put that out of the picture where you couldn't just like get another internship or
Yeah.
whatever. Like I interned all through school. I actually went to like community college. I had no clue what I wanted to do until like the last semester. And I
Mhm.
was actually like a painter. And then after that last class that I took was when I decided like in 4 months I needed to submit a portfolio to a university. And I
Yeah.
had one choice and I got lucky and got in. I don't know how. I submitted like a picture of my dog and like a painting of an octopus that I put
Yeah.
together. And that happened to work out. And while after those 2 years of community and then getting into this like program, um I started getting internships immediately, like whatever internship I could grab, one to like help pay like any sort of bills that I had, like rent and shit and food,
Mhm.
um and two because I knew like I needed to kind of catch up a bit. And so my first internship was like the most boring, like eye gouging experience. I worked at the like publishing, like the university publishing house, which was like so dry and boring. And I would fall asleep at my desk. And like it for me, like it wasn't fun, but
Mhm.
like it was a way that I could say, like, yeah, I have design experience, like I work in
Mhm.
InDesign 6 hours of the day or 3 hours a day, however long I was there for. And I just set text and create boring brochures that get mailed out
Yeah.
and silly ads that like make it in the paper, or whatever,
Mhm.
like the university. Like it was so dry and so like agonizingly boring.
Yeah.
Um, but I did it for a semester and the next semester I got a slightly better one. I like interned at a um I interned at again, another really boring one because I would just fall asleep at my desk. But I interned at like a soft goods, like sports company where they would just license logos from sports teams and they would just put it on stuffed animals and like all these weird things that people
Mhm.
love to buy for like their kids or their family. And again, that was so boring. It was also so not sketchy, but like they had like a warehouse like off campus somewhere where it's just this big long room with like tables stacked
Oh
and
man.
two like a design like people would be on both sides. And almost every day that I went in, they I would fall asleep again at my desk, and the person across from me, who was a sweetheart, she would like try to wake me up and I just wouldn't wake up. And so I did that for a semester. And then at the end of that semester, they're like, yeah, we're not taking any interns. They were just letting me know that they weren't taking me. They weren't taking me as an
Oh
intern.
man.
So I did
Yeah.
that. And then, I did another one. I interned at like an Italian preschool and was helping the head of the school. Like it was just her and her husband, like make marketing stuff again, and like doing website stuff. And like
Wow.
eventually I kept going and moving up,
Yeah.
and so like you have to start somewhere. Granted, like, this idea that you have, like, yeah, I don't have like a traditional design background and I don't have like experience, like, you're not going to go and be a creative director tomorrow, like none of
Right.
us do that, right?
Yeah.
It takes time to get there. It takes more than just being a good graphic designer, a good creative to get to these places that we have in our heads. So like, don't worry about, oh, I don't have the experience. It's like, I need to get the experience. So where do I want to go and get that,
Okay. Yeah, that's really helpful to know. Thank you for sharing like your
Believe me, I had a lot of
background.
fuck ups in my days.
Yeah.
So a lot of boring internships, I mean, like the first, I think like even, so I actually interned at a nightclub. Do you know, you're in LA. Have you ever heard of Pasha in New York when it was around?
No, I'm not familiar with that.
Have you ever heard of Pasha? It's
Um,
like
I
a
don't, I don't,
global, it's like a global nightclub brand or
uh-huh.
group, and they have clubs all over, and they had a super like a mega club, like a 3-4 floor club in New York. And again, like it wasn't a design internship. It was actually just like a marketing internship. But
Yeah.
that was like one of the last ones where I was like, cool, I want to go intern for a nightclub because like they put on cool events and then I'll get to go to shows and this and that. And I didn't do any design. All I did was like submit links for Facebook and events tickets and try to get tickets sold. Like that's all I did.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like that, there's nothing stopping you from like getting that work experience, right? It may not be directly like involved with design, but like all of that stuff contributes to whatever it is you want to do, like,
Right.
you know, I actually like later on, like after I graduated, I ended up working for them as the designer, and like that was one of my first early jobs.
Wow. Yeah. I feel like it yeah, I guess just like there's a lot of skills, just like a lot of things like connected to design that don't necessarily have to be design in a way.
Totally. I mean,
Yeah.
I look at it as like I want to be someone who helps clients with like a couple of different things. I don't want to be just the person that they come to and say I need a logo, because I think like when you start to work with people like that, it gets very like prescriptive and it gets very like they just kind of view you as a pair of hands, right? Like they can't do it, so they ask you to do it and they pay you to do it. And at times it can get kind of messy. So like you're saying, like you can see how design can contribute to all of these other different facets, right? Like marketing and promotion and actually contributing to things like sales, right? Like design in the event world can very much create a feeling or an atmosphere that want to entice people to participate, which
Yeah.
usually sometimes means the exchange of money.
Yeah.
And like when you can acknowledge that, when you start to see that, like what this thing that you work on or create contributes to that, that makes more sense to people who aren't designers, who aren't creatives. I think another thing in all those experiences that I had and all the experience I've had as a designer for the last 10 years has allowed me to see where design can contribute to business, so that when I do talk to clients that are just like, yeah, I'm starting this business and I know I need a logo. It's like, great, you acknowledge that you need a logo, but why do you need a logo? It's because that's going to allow you to build a customer or an audience that makes you stand out when they think of all the million other companies that do the same thing you do, or whatever it may be, or the same, other events that are in the same, genre of music or space or location, trying to think of like what would be a really good example of like, event or music, that a music kind of like collective or group that does that. I mean, look at like, have you ever heard of not yeah, well, Circo Loco is one,
Yeah.
but what is the one? I gotta look it up. I gotta find it. 1 second. El Row. El Row is the
Yeah,
is
I
the
think
is the
I've
party.
I've heard of that before. Yeah.
Let's look at El Row for as an example, right? Like
Mhm.
El Row is this like big, amazing kind of party that people go to
Mhm.
that here, let me pull it up as we talk about El Row. El Row. What did I click on here? So El Row is this like, it's a DJ party at the end of the day. It's a music party,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
It's a show, but this is their thing, like they go really above and beyond, and like
Yeah.
they create this atmosphere, right? And like, now, sure, this might not be what we're looking at in terms of images like graphic design, but like this is
Mhm.
that same idea. People want to go to El Row because of how like bright and colorful and
Yeah.
festive and like, just like over the top it is. They have like amazing
Mhm.
performers, and all of that stuff contributes to the success of El Row. The fact that their stage design is just like absolutely insane, and their
Mhm.
performers are like so crazy, and they always have a good lineup, like stuff like that. Like, in a way, that's the same idea that we're talking about with design. Like design starts to contribute to all of these things that like build these fans like that want to participate.
Mhm.
And you can very much approach it in that sense for yourself as well, on a smaller scale slightly.
Yeah, yeah.
Anything else that you want to go over? Any other questions before we potentially sign off?
Um, I think that was all I had, but if I ever did have like questions in the future, like once I like do more like with my portfolio, like would it be okay to like reach out through email or
Sure,
anything
yeah.
like
You
that?
have my email. Feel free to send me a note or an update if you have any thoughts or anything like that.
Okay, cool.
Um, After this, about 5 or 10 minutes, you'll probably get an email from me with, it's just going to have a link to like 2 or 3 questions. The faster you can fill it out and send it back to me, that lets me know where I should send any notes, and where I can send you the link to this recording.
Okay, perfect.
All right.
All
Aaron, it was
right.
lovely to meet you.
Yeah,
Like I
it's good
said, you
to
have
meet
my
you too.
email, so you can
Yes,
send a note or anything like that, and enjoy the rest of your night or
you
day,
too.
whatever it is today.
Yeah. Thank you, John.
Have a good one.
All
Bye-bye.
right. You too. Bye.